Okay. So that was the video that we have from RadFest on Dr. Rose, a phenomenal scientist, and that's indicative of what the videos are like from the RadFest. You can go to radfest.com and you can purchase the videos from the past festivals. So if you like that and you want to get more, I would recommend it. All right. As I mentioned, we are live streaming and we are recording this. So if you'd like to see this again, you want to watch this again, immediately after this evening is over, if you go home, you can watch this and let your friends and neighbors know about it as well. I have a question for you. How many came from, I was asking you how you heard about this, but where you came from. How many people came as far away as Palm Beach? Okay, wow. How about as far away as Naples? A couple of Naples over here? I believe someone maybe came from Jacksonville, drove all the way down from Jacksonville to be here tonight. All right. Anybody farther, coming from farther away than Jacksonville? You get the award tonight. All right. So we have some very serious people here tonight coming. I'm glad you're here. Now we have a live speaker this evening, a live presentation. And our speaker is the founder of this church and one of the co-founders of the Rad Festival, as well as the founder of a number of organizations to promote unlimited lifespans. He's the director and co-founder of a world-famous consumer advocacy organization that funds research and disseminates information to consumers about optimal health. Cornerstone in the radical life extension and a major figure in cryonics, Mr. Faloon has made hundreds of media appearances over the years and interviewed by dozens, if not hundreds, of magazines, newspapers, and online blogs. Let's welcome Mr. Bill Faloon, giving his update on age reversal clinical trials.
Let's see, my clicker is needed. I've been doing presentations, by the way, since December 9th at some of the most prestigious venues in Palm Beach County, PGA, Mar-a-Lago, Breakers, Colony Hotel, Kravis Center. I've been getting opportunities to speak in front of very high-end groups. I've been able to enlighten some very influential people about the work of Dr. Michael Rose and many others, and also enlighten these individuals as to how they may be able to save their own lives. Now, this talk that I'm going to give, I gave yesterday morning at 8:15 a.m. And for those people who know me a little bit, they are wondering, how did you function at that hour, Bill? And I think one of the reasons I was able to get to sleep at midnight and wake up around 6:30 a.m. were the NAD infusions that I personally underwent in April 2017. This is where I had a registered nurse come to my office, and they hooked me up to the NAD. It dripped in my body for about 6 hours. We've since reduced the protocol where a person can probably do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But what that NAD did for me is improve my sleep patterns about 80%. And this particular event I did on Friday at the Breakers Hotel, very prestigious location in Palm Beach, in case you don't know. They had invited me probably about 5 years in a row to be the speaker. And I said, I don't function at 8 in the morning. 8 at night would be really good for me. But this was an annual breakfast that they had been doing for about 35 years. And Dr. Ben Carson was supposed to be the keynote speaker. He bowed out. They called me up, and I said, okay, I think I can do it this year. So my presentation I'm going to do here is essentially a version of what people paid about $100 each to hear yesterday morning, and I had to, of course, edit it because we are heavily censored. There's information I can disclose in this church that I'm not allowed to disclose elsewhere, and vice versa. So when I do a presentation, I just have to cut out certain pieces of information because we have a government that censors our ability to freely disseminate information. Now, as it relates to stroke, it is a leading cause, if not the leading cause, of long-term disability in the United States. There's a lot of these strokes that occur, and they're most often caused, about 85% of them are caused when a clot occludes flow to a portion of the brain, and that portion of the brain slowly dies, and eventually a person can become blind, paralyzed, or die. And 2,000 Americans every day, I mean, this is not some rare event, 2,000 Americans every day suffer an ischemic. They can lose their eyesight, they can lose cognitive ability, and many of them just die. Terrible situation. Now, if you're lucky enough to make it to an emergency room, there basically are three outcomes. Some people are very fortunate that they get out of the emergency room in rather good shape. They're basically given a second chance to take preventative steps to avoid a blood clot from forming again, and they are able to get good medical care in that ER room. Okay. Okay, we're going to try a different mic here. Okay, so 3 outcomes depending on where you go. Unfortunately, a significant percent of people, they wind up in nursing homes for the rest of their lives, and then eventually a cemetery. And our contention is, at this point in time in history, too many doctors are giving up far too soon. Patients are taken in to ER rooms, and they are not being given the latest technology. In some cases, it's impossible to give them the latest technology because the doctors aren't yet sufficiently trained. But I'm going to tell you what you can do to make sure that you gain access to that technology in the event that you suffer any symptoms of a stroke. And to give you an example of how slow conventional medicine can be in adopting proven ways to treat a disease, something as acute as stroke, the drug tissue plasminogen activator, TPA, approved by the FDA in 1996, which was, by the way, 10 years later than it should have been. But the FDA did approve this to treat acute ischemic stroke. It's a clot-dissolving drug. So if you have a clot that's occluding blood flow to one of your cerebral arteries, if you're fortunate enough, the TPA itself will dissolve that clot. And yet, 10 years later, well, only 1 to 3% of the community hospitals were using TPA. For the most part, people were going into the ER room, they had all the symptoms of stroke, they were slowly becoming paralyzed, and the doctors were doing nothing. And yet the drug was sitting there in the formulary. They weren't utilizing it. And this is one of the reasons why I did some interesting work in investigating what else could be done beyond TPA. And what we uncovered was the fact that going back to the early 2000s, there were some progressive interventionalists, these are called vascular interventionalists, using a technology known as endovascular thrombectomy. This is the most important word you're going to learn tonight, by the way. Endovascular thrombectomy, because if you suffer any symptoms of a stroke and you're going to figure out what you do, where should I go? It's not necessarily the nearest hospital or ER room, it's the nearest thrombectomy capable facility. And they are available in every major metropolitan area, but you may not get there. And as it related to when this technology evolved, well, it could have been made available a lot sooner. But the New England Journal of Medicine published in 2015 that acute ischemic stroke that was putting people in nursing homes and cemeteries, it could be reversed. In the event that TPA wasn't working, well, the thrombectomy procedure would go in surgically through the femoral artery and insert a catheter right into the artery that's blocked by a clot. And the catheter would retrieve the clot. And as soon as that clot was removed, a patient who was paralyzed, they would slowly regain control of their body. It was incredible. Now you see that 6 hours after stroke onset, January 1st, 2015, New England Journal of Medicine writing that editorial. We already knew at this church, we already knew and talked about the fact that thrombectomy was effective 12 hours after stroke onset. How did we know? We called vascular interventionalists throughout South Florida to find out who was doing it and who wasn't. And the ones that were doing it were saying, yeah, they say up to 6 hours, but we tried on some patients and we're getting them back after 12 hours. We'll move forward just 2.5 years, huge breakthrough. They did a study where they used very aggressive thrombectomy, and they were recovering patients up to 24 hours after the onset of acute ischemic stroke. Can you imagine how many people right now as we talk are paralyzed in a nursing home with other paralyzed people? The aroma is not so good, as you know, in these facilities, and we now have this technology, and yet it's still underutilized. So what you need to do is locate the nearest thrombectomy capable facility closest to you, so in the event that you develop stroke symptoms, you want to go to the people who can reverse it, and not to a community hospital that may not. And we had the American Heart Association just 1 month ago endorse what we discovered at this church 4 years ago. It's now official policy that up to 24 hours after a stroke, endovascular thrombectomy may be effective, and the drug TPA should be more aggressively used because there are more recoverable patients. So we now have the official endorsement. The hospitals around the country are rushing to train more vascular interventionalists to be able to do this procedure, because the problem is there's not enough doctors that have the training to do it. And yet it could have been done had there been more of a sense of urgency, and there wasn't. Even though we were advocating for it, the New England Journal of Medicine was advocating for it, it was still took way too long. And this is the estimate that we have of the number of people in nursing homes right now just because of the 3-year delay in implementing thrombectomy procedure. About 180,000 Americans needlessly confined to a nursing home, half their body paralyzed, their eyesight diminished, their cognitive function lost. They're laying there when they didn't have to be. We did a lot of research to come up with this number. It's only an estimate, but we tried to get that number as accurate as we could. 180,000 needless people who had suffered an acute stroke that was reversible, but the doctors in the ER room just didn't want to use the technology or didn't have access to it because they didn't prioritize it the way we'd like them to. And this was announced, by the way, thrombectomy on the front page of the Wall Street Journal just a couple weeks ago. And I was pleasantly surprised to see this, because we've been advocating it for this church, in this church since 2014, that if you have a stroke, make sure you go to a facility where they can remove that clot. And readers of the Wall Street Journal, and often the Wall Street Journal is ahead of other people, but this was the headline article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, February 7th, 2018. Just a couple weeks ago, the rest of the world found out about thrombectomy. Well, people in this church, well, they had to do something. No, thrombectomy is a conventional technology, first demonstrated efficacious in 1999, and they spent about 15 years perfecting it. So by the year 2015, it was perfected as far as we were concerned, as far as the New England Journal of Medicine was concerned. This is not alternative medicine. This is conventional medicine, but not going fast enough. That was the problem. They had the technology, but they weren't utilizing it. They were condemning people to nursing homes. But right now, it's going to be, at some point, standard care. It's probably going to take 2 or 3 years before you can reliably count on your ER room having this technology. In the meantime, keep yourself educated. And here's a real-world example. Pat Robertson has an ischemic stroke. His family recognized the symptoms. They took him to an emergency room where the TPA drug was immediately administered. He was laying there with half of his body undergoing paralysis. Now, had it not been for the use of the TPA drug, he'd be in a nursing home right now, half his body paralyzed, like 180,000 other people. But the drug in this case worked for him. A few days later, he left the hospital. He's okay because of technology. But remember, this was approved by the FDA in 1996, and by 2007, virtually nobody was using it. So we moved forward to 2018, and people like Pat Robertson, and frankly, 2,000 people every single day, at least, can gain access. But look at this timeline. Look at when TPA was first approved to reverse coronary thrombosis, a clot that blocks a coronary artery. It was approved in 1987. And we and some others, including Larry King and the Wall Street Journal, had to lobby the FDA to get this drug approved. FDA was dragging their feet on it. So 1987, it's approved to reverse coronary thrombosis. Thrombosis means a clot that's blocking blood flow to an artery. So approved in 1987 to reverse coronary thrombosis, and it took till 1996 to get approved to reverse cerebral thrombosis. And here we are in 2018, and they're just now realizing we have to start using TPA more often, and if that doesn't work, the endovascular thrombectomy, the mechanical removal of that blood clot from a person's body. Now, this is my father-in-law. He was 79 when this picture was taken. That is his 6-month-old grandson, Chance. Some of you have seen him at the church. 30 days after this picture was taken, he threw an acute ischemic stroke. He had incompetent medical care across the board, and about 3 years later, this is him, laying in a diaper in a nursing home. He had another grandchild, never got to enjoy that grandfather experience because, well, he was half paralyzed, half blind, and he died a miserable death, and all of that was preventable. If he had been sitting in these pews right now and heard this information, I think he may may have had a very different outcome. And every one of you has that opportunity because you're being given information that's based on peer-reviewed published studies. So if you look at these timelines, you realize that a lot of people didn't need to suffer the effects of an acute stroke. It was a reversible phenomenon. And the fact is, we are able, we believe at this stage in medical history, to induce some reversal of pathological aging. And yet there's a lot of apathy out there, just like there was with TPA and thrombectomy, a lot of apathy. And unfortunately, that's one of our biggest barriers right now, is the fact that people don't have the initiative. So as it relates to you avoiding the catastrophic problems associated with a stroke, you need to find the closest thrombectomy capable stroke center to you. They used to use the term comprehensive stroke center. That could be one that just uses the TPA drug and does not yet have the endovascular people. Now, I gave this presentation yesterday morning in Palm Beach, so this is a listing of the thrombectomy capable facilities in Palm Beach County. There's facilities in Miami, Broward, they're all over the place, but not every hospital can do it. So where you live, you need to identify where is the nearest thrombectomy capable hospital. So if you develop a stroke symptom, that's where you want to go. These are signs and symptoms of a stroke. I'm just going to leave that slide up for a couple seconds. You can just type onto Google stroke symptoms and read what they are, kind of memorize them, because if you see someone experience them or you experience them yourself, well, you want to do something about that. You want to at least make sure you go to an ER room that's going to be able to reverse it if it really is a stroke. Bottom line, most strokes are preventable. These are risk factors that can be measured in the blood. If they are elevated, lower them. You will then reduce your risk of ischemic stroke. Some of these tests are pretty standard. Others you have to ask for them because doctors don't routinely prescribe them. But each one of these risk factors can be controlled. Hypertension can also be controlled, but most people aren't doing it adequately. And there's been a big debate about where blood pressure readings should be, but when you realize the majority of people over 65 are hypertensive. The vast majority have blood pressure that's higher than normal. And you look at all the diseases caused by high blood pressure, well, it's pretty much everything that afflicts aging people. Kidney failure, blindness, cognitive dysfunction, stroke, heart attack, you name it, high blood pressure can be an underlying cause. It just doesn't have to be. And one of the reasons is that doctors got it wrong. They viewed hypertension, the definition, by the dictionary definition, which is abnormally high blood pressure. That's what the dictionary says. The medical definition, quite different. It's blood pressure high enough that it may eventually cause health problems. And it's because of this misinterpretation of the definition that caused so many needless strokes and kidney failures and heart attacks. But if you realize that hypertension is not abnormal, and that's what the dictionary definition says, an abnormally high blood pressure. No, hypertension is normal. If you're over 65, you probably have blood pressure that's too high. So a big debate went on for 3 to 4 decades. The scientific literature consistently showed that you want your blood pressure under 120/80. Whereas conventional medicine, for the most part, did not start treating until systolic reached 140 to 150. So patients would walk into their doctor's offices, and the doctor would check their blood pressure, and they say, oh, you're 135/85, you're normal. And they were. They were normal compared to every patient of that age group. But they weren't in an optimal condition. They were, in fact, in a very dangerous condition. So this debate went on and on for over 3 decades, which is ridiculous considering the published literature verified very much that when you keep your blood pressure below 120 compared to just 120 to 139, look at this, 71% increased risk of stroke if you're between 120 and 139 compared to if you're under 120. 50% increase of heart attack risk. So you want your blood pressure, for the most part, this is not for everybody, you want your blood pressure below 120/80. 115/75 is a really good number to shoot for if you have sufficient perfusion to your brain and kidneys. Problem is that some older people have had chronically elevated blood pressure for most of their lives, and they have damaged microcapillary beds. They actually need higher blood pressure to keep their brain and kidneys and other organs adequately perfused. Perfused means blood flow, circulation. So the problem with those people is here they have already damaged arterial systems
and they need to continue to inflict damage by keeping their blood pressure higher than what is optimal.
Low blood pressure confers longevity.
See, I'm going to back up a little bit because I was going to take a water break, and let me see if I can go in reverse. Okay, this is a presentation that I gave at a conference 9 years ago, trying to tell people, get that blood pressure down, get it down. And you can see this year 2013 study came out, kind of validating that you want to have your blood pressure lower. So I'm going to just play this right now and take a little water break.
Low blood pressure confers longevity. Low blood pressure protects us against stroke, heart attack, kidney failure. So again, we are battling nature tooth and nail, and we are refusing to accept what nature has in store for us. So this debate went on for a long time, and the medical profession did us a big favor. They lobbied the government, and the government funded a big study. This is the kind of study that doctors can believe in, because the other studies, they were observational. They showed if you have blood pressure below 120, you had fewer strokes, fewer heart attacks. That was good. But the doctors wanted to see an interventional study. So they took a large group of hypertensive patients, systolic readings like over 150. One group was pushed below 140. The other group was pushed below 120. And then they had to terminate the study early. Reason? Well, the people whose blood pressure was pushed below 120 had 43% fewer cardiovascular deaths. 43% lower risk of cardiovascular death, 27% lower mortality risk. This study validates what we had been a proponent of since the early 1980s. And it's not like we discovered anything on our own. We simply read what was in the peer-reviewed published literature, and it consistently showed people with lower blood pressure were having fewer strokes, fewer heart attacks, and they were living longer. It was really simple, and yet it took this long to make it standardized. So how did the doctors get it wrong? They were seeing 30, 40 patients a day. Patients over 65 typically had blood pressure way over 120, and they were saying, you're normal. And of course you were normal. The trouble is, normal is not optimal. The older we get, we don't want to be normal. We want to be very, very abnormal. And if you look at this slide, the data, again, back to the 1980s, showing optimal blood pressure, about 115 over 75. That's optimal. And why did it take so long for the medical profession to take hold of this information and utilize it? A lot of reasons I'm not going to get into, but the bottom line is, take charge of your health. You can buy an at-home blood pressure monitor at Walgreens, Walmart. They cost around $40 to $50. They'll last for years. You can measure your blood pressure and identify ways to lower it, either through lifestyle, diet. The pharmaceuticals, a drug called telmisartan, we identified that about 3 years ago. It's a really safe antihypertensive drug, and there's no reason if your blood pressure is high not to take this drug. It's not side effect laden. It actually has side benefits. Taking charge of your own health. And I shouldn't have to ask this group this question, but if anyone thinks they want to be normal and just grow old and be normal, it's not so good. It's really a calamity, and the good news is we can control it to a huge extent. And at the end of November 2017, the American Heart Association recognized what we had been a proponent of since the 1980s, optimal systolic pressure under 120 millimeters of mercury. And the upper number, by the way, is the most important. That's the one that reflects the pounding that your arterial system takes with each and every heartbeat. Under 120 is where you want to be for the most part. So, low blood pressure confers longevity. This is an optimal range for most people, not everybody, 115 over 75. And blood pressure facts, let me see, we had to censor some information out of here, but the bottom line is the drug telmisartan, 40 to 80 milligrams a day. For most people, that will bring your blood pressure into a safe range and improve endothelial function. It has a dual benefit, and we identified that a number of years ago. We've talked about it at this church. And therapies to reverse aging. We've already shown the technology exists to reverse acute ischemic stroke. It's not being utilized. Technologies exist to prevent stroke and heart attack, and those are not being utilized, not yet, in a widespread way. That American Heart Association recommendation will slowly disseminate into the medical community, but it could take years before something happens. What we propose is the fact that there is technology right now that can potentially rejuvenate older people. The animals are deriving benefit. Unfortunately, we are slowly
deriving benefit way too slow because we're growing old and we can't wait for the kind of delays that historically have occurred with every single technology. You look at smallpox, and this is a chart that we created looking at the history of smallpox eradication in Great Britain. Now, Edward Jenner discovered the cowpox vaccine's efficacy. He didn't actually discover it. Someone else did about 20 years before him, but he used it, saw that it worked, and was an advocate for it, like I am, an advocate to try to reverse aging. And he was able to push a lot of good ideas forth. He got the British government to put some money into research, and he got them to actually mandate universal vaccination. But 100,000 people in Great Britain alone died of smallpox after Edward Jenner validated it. After he validated it, 100,000 died, and it was a long, torturous process where there'd be a couple decades where people would get vaccinated, and then for some reason decide not to, and they'd start dying of smallpox again. So we have that same problem occurring. And if you look and think about when we were all alive last century, 20th century, there were 300 million deaths from smallpox, a disease that was totally preventable, but the public didn't jump on top of it. And people died needlessly. Huge problem. Smallpox has a lot to do with aging from the standpoint that smallpox was caused by a virus, and no one knew what viruses existed back then. But they figured a workaround to inoculate people so they would not die of smallpox. Aging, we feel young plasma contains numerous constituents to reverse aging processes, and yet if we don't know what's in that young plasma exactly that's working, it doesn't matter if we're able to make old people grow biologically younger. Great news is we know a lot more about aging today than what Edward Jenner did about smallpox. He was able to conquer smallpox in areas that adopted his widespread inoculation technique, and we are much further ahead than he is in eradicating biological aging. Wall Street Journal did a nice story about a drug called rapamycin. We refer to rapamycin in many respects as a super metformin. It may work so much better than metformin that people may at some point switch. And there is a human trial going on right now in Southern California where elderly people are taking rapamycin. We've done baseline measurements of their aging biomarkers, their clinical measures, to identify where they are when they started, and we're going to see where they are 3 to 4 months afterwards. We're going to see if it reverses aging the way it's done in the animal model, and CNN has reported on the lifespan extending properties of rapamycin, and I'm going to play you a little video right now. Some of you have seen this, but I think it's a fascinating video to watch.
Go everybody, go! Go!
You sit? Good boy.
He should be at the end of his life.
He doesn't look it.
Yes.
Before you start taking rapamycin, how long would he run around for?
After about 10 minutes of running and playing, he would get really tired, stop, and then his arthritis would kick in. And then he wouldn't walk for the next 2 or 3 days.
And now how long will he run around for?
An hour or two.
This drug is very likely to have the same effects on lifespan and health span in dogs and probably in people as we've seen in laboratory animals.
Now, an update to that study: if you have a dog who's undergoing congestive heart failure, which is a common cause of death with older dogs, it seems to be working to reverse a heart failure. So if anyone wants to experiment on a dying dog, I mean, that seems to be a low-risk type of study. Import some rapamycin from some other country, give them a dose based. Humans, by the way, who are taking it are taking between 3 and 6 milligrams just once a week. It's not a drug you take every day. 3 to 6 milligrams once a week. It does all of its beneficial effects within a 24 to 30-hour period, and then it leaves the body. It disappears, which is really nice because you don't want it in your body all the time. You just want it in your body enough to suppress some nasty events that occur with aging.
mainly the excess proliferation of something called the mechanistic target of rapamycin, mTORC1. That's the primary mechanism of rapamycin. And we have people in this audience who are taking it, and I'm going to start taking it very soon, waiting for some clinical results to come out from Southern California. So we'll probably be advocating rapamycin at some point as aggressively as we have metformin, which we've been doing now 23 consecutive years. I have recommended to everyone I see who's over 30, 40, I said, why don't you start taking metformin, because it might delay aging in a major way. And delay is our enemy as it relates to technology. Scurvy was something that they first identified a cure for in 1497, and it took 400 years before vitamin C was discovered, and they finally realized scurvy does not need to kill anybody anymore. You can either suck on a lime, a lemon, or just take some vitamin C, and you won't die of scurvy. But if you look at the tortured history of it, they proved it worked, and then someone did a flawed study using oxidized lime juice. By it being oxidized, there was no more vitamin C, so it didn't work. And they discredited the scurvy cure, which was citrus. They discredited it, and then people started dying of scurvy again. And this is what's going to happen with aging. We're going to figure out how to deal with it, and not everyone's going to jump on board. As Dr. Michael Rose mentioned during his presentation, people in 1900 used to die of infectious diseases. And 96 years later, that became almost a relic of the past, other than people who suffer from immune senescence due to aging. Aging is our enemy, and if we don't die from anything else, our immune system will weaken and make us vulnerable to these horrific diseases. And as it relates to delay, again, I try to put this up to make people understand, just because the technology is not available doesn't mean it won't work. And penicillin was something that had been worked on by a number of scientists, including Joseph Lister, someone at the Pasteur Institute, who Michael Rose talked about. Here in 1897, a student there at the Pasteur Institute demonstrated that penicillin could eradicate bacterial infection in animals. Now just think, back in those days, tuberculosis and all types of bacterial infections were the leading cause of death. A scientist shows in 1897 there's a way to kill those bacteria without killing the animal, and nobody does anything about it. And then Dr. Fleming, Alexander Fleming, 1928, he finds penicillin kills bacteria, publishes his work in 1929, and virtually nothing is done. We had to wait till 1946 for penicillin to become widely available in this country. That was a delay of 18 years. 18 years for something as simple as penicillin killing bacteria, which was the leading cause of death, to become widely available. So we talk at this church about ways to maybe slow or reverse aging. Now, we may gain access to that information before the rest of the world does, because it takes a long time for people to keep up. The parabiosis we talk about in animals, that was pretty much proven by 1972 to work. They started that research in the 1950s. By 1972 it was validated, and then it started to become more recognized. What we know today is young blood rejuvenates old animals. The studies are consistent. There is a systemic age reversal effect when young blood is circulated into the bodies of old animals. And Nature published this information in 2015. They talk about the multiple systems by which young blood, in the case of what we're going to do as far as research, it'll be young plasma, how it may rejuvenate older animals. Leading institutions spending money trying to figure out how can they take this animal research and translate it into human clinical trials. That's great. It's nice that they're working on this, but we can't wait. We're growing old way too fast. Johnson & Johnson throwing money into it. That's fantastic. They're trying to see if young plasma can maybe reverse early stage Alzheimer's disease. Again, this is conventional pharmaceutical research. It can take 10 years before they get to a point where it's approved. A lot of people in this audience don't have the 10 years. This study was fascinating. It got a lot of media attention where they took teenage plasma and injected it into older mice. Over just a brief period of time, injected teenage plasma into older mice, and the mice grew biologically younger. They behaved younger. Their brains, which were shrinking, they went the other direction. A process known as neurogenesis, the growing of new brain cells, occurred in response to that young plasma going into these old mice. So this kind of research is what motivates us to say, if we can set up clinical trials where we use healthy young plasma, put it into older people, we may derive these kind of benefits. And the benefit that I like more than anything else is the fact that these animals started to behave as if they were much younger. Because they were having all these young plasma factors being put in via the teenage human blood. Washington Post, recognizing this technology needs to start being applied to humans. The Economist, Wall Street Journal, pretty much across the board, we're seeing recognition of the prospect of human age reversal. And we know we're up against certain barriers. There's people who still think this is something that's immoral, can't be done, why even try? Well, that's the way it was with everything. There's always the skeptics out there who don't think technology can solve a problem. We are confident technology will reverse the aging process, and we're getting a lot of good publicity, ways to boost NAD levels in the body. Time magazine, the front cover of Time magazine this week, talking about boosting NAD, which I talked about at the beginning of my talk because I was able to do it via infusions, and that's the way we're recommending for people over 50 years of age is to get NAD plus infusions. And the scientist who they interviewed from Harvard, David Sinclair, he made it very clear that once you lose all of your NAD, which typically as a person grows past 80 or 90, their NAD levels drop to virtually zero, you're dead. It's that simple. You need NAD to sustain your life, and when you're young, your NAD blood level is around 80. That's the way they measure it, 80. By the time you reach age 80, you may only have 1 to 5 as it relates to the amount of NAD in your blood, and this may be eventually recognized, when I'm talking about aging, may be eventually recognized as an NAD plus deficient disease. Once you have enough NAD, you may be able to live a long time. So front cover of Time magazine this week talking about a technology that we talked about in this church many years ago. And this is one of the value of attending these services. Also, just last week, some people put some big money into aging research, $250 million. This is spectacular. We love it. But again, these are conventional people. If they make a discovery, they may put it through the FDA's approval process, and in 10 years it'll be available to everybody, but that's not soon enough for us, certainly not at my age. I'm 63, and I don't guarantee myself 10 years at this point. I pretend like I've got maybe 6 months. We need to move faster. That's the way I try to motivate myself. And again, the wealthy people in Silicon Valley are viewing aging as just another challenge that technology can resolve. I mean, they've done it with everything else. Government is putting money into aging research. It's about the only way they're going to spare Medicare from insolvency. They've got to reverse aging or they're going to go broke. They can't afford all the expenses. And the media picking up on the fact that right now wealthy people are spending some serious dollars. The good news is you don't have to. Rapamycin is going to be available from Europe very soon in 5 milligram tablets. The price is going to be reasonable. We'll tell you where to get it as soon as they let me know that they have it. And we're going to try to do some analytical work to make sure it's the real thing. But people are importing it from Canada and India right now. It doesn't cost a lot of money unless you buy it in the United States. Then it costs a fortune. It's cost prohibitive. But anywhere else, it costs virtually nothing. George Church, doing CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology. He's predicting he will be able to reverse aging within the next 5 or 10 years with this technology. We sure hope he's right. We'd like to support him, but the good news is he seems to have over $100 million of funding, so he does not need our support. This is spectacular. People are putting money into age reversal. Some of the most famous people in the country, multi-billionaires, are recognizing that if they put technology into the problem of solving aging, they're going to resolve it. They are going to be able to live a lot longer. And just think, these young people, they're in their 20s and 30s, they're multi-billionaires. They've been able to achieve the impossible through the work they've done with the computer industry, and they're just looking at aging as something that can be dealt with. And this came out just a month ago. The FDA has cleared Mayo to accelerate a stem cell technology in which they're going to be able to produce billions of stem cells in short periods of time. And I get this information, by the way, via the network we have of people who are out there trying to find a cure for aging. They let me know about this, and then I put it up on the screen like I do right now. But we do have some major advances occurring, and the media will run a headline story one day and then forget about it the next. I try to remind people this is all going on while we talk. And as it relates to the government sometimes helping or hurting. It depends on which government there is that's trying to get in the way. But stem cell therapy made a lot of news around the year 2001. And then the federal government interfered in a way that they suppressed federally funded dollars going into it. Since the federal government puts money into virtually every research center, they virtually stopped stem cell research. And I can't tell you how many people have died because of that, because we're seeing results now that could have been made available a lot earlier. So our time, as it relates to how long we're going to live, not so good, not so good. This is based on Social Security mortality tables. I picked the age of 63 because that's how old I am. And I look at that and I say, I only have 21 years left? That's not a lot of time. And that's average, okay? That's not a guarantee. And if you're 73, 83, you have less time. And this is basically an average of male and female. There is an urgent need to accelerate human aging research. And I am putting on these presentations at high-end venues, and I'm getting some traction from people who are saying, yeah, I have some money, I'll help you out, but it's nowhere near what we need it to be. And I let the groups know that the scientific community does not believe there is an upper limit to how long human beings can live. If you look at it close enough, you realize, well, this is just a technology problem that can be resolved, just like they did with Google and Amazon and Facebook. It's just technology. That's all. Once it comes about, people are going to live a lot longer, and people are living a lot longer. Because we're in that era, we don't realize that living to be 78, 79 on average, well, that's kind of a record high in the United States, and it's going to go a lot better. This is a chart that inspires me because infants used to die at a horribly high rate, either at childbirth or within the first year of their life. And yet, over an 82-year period, they were able to reduce the infant mortality rate by 90%. And maternal mortality rates, mothers dying during childbirth, well, that's gone down by 99% over an 82-year period. This is remarkable. What I predict is there will be somebody standing right in this church pew showing this occurring with aging. People dying of degenerative aging, it's going to go down 80 to 90, maybe 100%, where that won't be an issue anymore for people who intervene. So just like Michael Rose was showing some analogies as to what caused people to die in the past, and they were able to use technologies to make it go away, it went away with maternal death rates. It's going to go away with aging also. So I was up at the Breakers Hotel yesterday, and I wanted to make my presentation kind of fit the venue. So Henry Flagler, he was the founder of Palm Beach, the founder really of the whole east coast of Florida, remarkable individual. But I asked the group a question, and I'll ask the same question here. Henry Flagler, very wealthy, very successful. But if you had the choice of traveling back in time and being Henry Flagler, as opposed to maybe not being a successful person today, I know a lot of people in this group are successful, and not everybody, but if you had that choice, is there anyone who would like to travel back to 1890 and live the lavish lifestyle of Henry Flagler? No one? Well, you're a smart group, because you know when I do this, some people say, "Yeah, that sounds good." They think that's a good thing, and unfortunately, they're just somewhat incorrect, because with all the money that Henry Flagler had, he didn't have air conditioning. He also didn't have access to the medical therapies that we do today that we take for granted sometimes. That if we have some chest pain and we're rushed to an ER room, they can do a stent procedure, unblock that coronary artery, and we get out of the hospital in a couple days. He didn't have that. You develop a malignancy, well, the doctor would say, I've seen this before. He would feel maybe a bulge in your abdominal area. I've seen this before. Prognosis is not good. They didn't really know what to do. Even appendicitis. There were doctors doing appendectomies in very unusual ways around 1900, killing a lot of their patients. But just what we take for granted today, and the wealthiest people in the world just a little bit over 100 years ago had zero access to it. Zero. Can you imagine what the future is going to be like 80 years from now? The future is going to be incredible. So many people, all they think about is living well today, and what I'm trying to do is make the year 2045, because this is another question I asked. Would you rather live well today or be just a domestic servant in year 2045? And this is what the domestic servants, just the average people, will have by year 2045, according to Ray Kurzweil and a number of other futurists who have incredible track records of being able to pinpoint the way the future is going to go. The bottom line is we need to survive another 27 years. And my commitment to everybody is I'll make every attempt I can, no matter how old you are now, to get you to that year 2045, when we can then transcend the limitations of our biological lifespan and enjoy everything here and a heck of a lot more, because the fact is, any projections that we make now are probably understating how fantastic the future is going to be. We're talking about a biomedical renaissance, control of human aging. And when we first started talking about this in the 1970s, we didn't have a lot of data to substantiate it. It was more optimism than reality. It has transformed into reality. Metformin, you heard Michael Rose, who's a totally independent scientist from my group. He works on his projects. We love the work he's doing, by the way, in the animal models. Our issue is we're trying to save humans right now. So we need to inform you about what you should do as it relates to blood pressure, stroke symptoms, aging, and metformin. Pretty much the consensus in the community across the wide spectrums is you should be taking metformin. How many people in this group are taking metformin? Okay, so we have maybe 40%. You can order that also offshore for about $20. That might be a month or two supply. It's really cheap. It's really cheap. And so if your doctor won't prescribe it to you, I advocate, and look, I was arrested and thrown in jail over this stuff, but I continue to advocate it. Metformin is a drug that should be in your bodies. And I'm going to answer questions at the end. I'm almost done here. So Wall Street Journal, they ran a front page article a couple years ago on a clinical study in which metformin is going to be tested. And older people are clamoring to get into this study. And the older people don't know that all they have to do is ask their doctor for a prescription or go down to Mexico or order it offshore. It's not that hard to get your hands on this drug, and it has some tremendous properties. Now, we started recommending metformin in 1995, and this is the study that we based a lot of our recommendations on. Type 2 diabetics taking metformin, 36% reduced all-cause mortality rate. 36%, well, I'm going to take a drug. If it reduces my mortality by 36%, I'm going to take that drug. And then a more recent study showing that if you are pre-diabetic, which most of us in this room are, by the way, we don't control our sugar as well as we did when we were younger, metformin will reduce your risk of progressing to full-blown type 2 diabetes. So this is really spectacular to think that we have that technology available, and yet only 40% of people in this congregation right now are taking it, so maybe some more should. And I hope to provide you some better information as to where you can easily gain access to it. And if they take me away like they did before, it's okay. A lot of people will live longer. Just today in my email box was a study showing that type 2 diabetics taking metformin, their risk of cancer, overall cancer, any cancer, was reduced by 40%. And you know, cancer is a scary disease for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons it's scary is the treatments are so horrific. Now, they're curing a lot of cancer patients nowadays, but they're left with lifelong impairments, and sometimes secondary malignancies develop. But this study we talked about, MD Anderson, showing diabetic patients taking metformin, 62% reduced rate of pancreatic cancer. 62% reduced rate of a malignancy that kills virtually everyone who gets it. And then a study that came out today, literally today, I was sent in my email, so I can't put it up on the screen, but the overall cancer rates in diabetics taking metformin, a 40% reduction. Wow. Any pill that would do that, reducing cancer rates by 40%, would be going into my body. So I suggest people consider metformin because, unfortunately, it takes a long time for technology to be recognized. Metformin approved in England in 1957. And in 1994, gets approved in the United States. And we're still sitting here talking about should healthy people take metformin to slow their aging process. With all this data, thousands of studies that indicate metformin may slow aging, may help to reverse certain aging pathologies, and it's been validated. But 61 years, way too long. We just can't wait. So this concludes my, let's say, censored version of what I put on yesterday. Yeah, I'm just going to run through some of these slides. I always need to put a dead billionaire up here because they're dying every single month. Billionaires, people worth a lot of money. And this one did a lot of the right things. And we're trying to investigate what did he do wrong. He put $400 million into cancer research. And he died of prostate cancer. We don't understand how that could happen. And it could be he's like a whole lot of other people. I hate to say it. They'll literally write big checks to fund research. They support a lot of what we do, and they don't take care of their personal health. But we're going to try to get to the bottom of how a multi-billionaire who had cancer running in his family wound up dying of prostate cancer, something that can be detected early with regular PSA testing and can be treated, almost 100% cure rates if you catch it early enough. How did he die? We're trying to figure that out. And again, as far as us running out of time, if this just went down by a couple years, this is the men. I really only have 19 years, not 21. The previous charge said at age 63 you got 21 more years, but actually I only have 19. And as I grow older, that number diminishes, so we need to accelerate the human research. I don't want to get into this predicament, and this is like possibly a stroke victim, so if you have any symptom of an ischemic stroke, please go to a thrombectomy capable center and make sure you reduce your stroke risk factors. Okay, I'll take questions.
All right, let's start here, Tom.
Where is the nearest thrombectomy center from here in this area?
Okay, probably Hollywood Memorial, but we validated that about a year and a half ago. And the problem is there's groups of vascular interventionalists, and sometimes they migrate to other hospitals. So I don't want to tell anyone in this group that there's a place that they can go in Broward County, and then only to find out last week they migrated to another hospital. So we did validate those Palm Beach facilities for my talk yesterday, and we weren't able to validate them. But what you do is you pick up the phone and you call the hospitals closest to you and say, do you have thrombectomy capable staff available 24/7? And if they do, you write that phone number down of the hospital. You let everyone around you know, if I develop stroke symptoms, take me to that thrombectomy capable hospital where they can reverse the acute stroke.
And Tom, and all of you, if you do that, please send that information to me, and I'll keep it on hand for our other members here at the church, whether you're in Naples, Jackson, or in Hollywood, wherever it may be.
Will we need a prescription for rapamycin?
Well, in this country, they want you to be controlled by your doctors and by the state, and they say you need a prescription. But you can order these drugs from other countries, and the FDA does not like that. They pursued me criminally for over 9 years. They did put me in jail. They threatened me with life in prison. I did not back down. I will continue to recommend drugs the FDA does not approve for uses that they don't approve. And the FDA approved a clinical study on metformin, but they don't approve people just getting their hands on it. I'm telling you, get your hands on that drug. It may save your life.
Question from Lenny.
I'm taking 10 milligrams of lisinopril daily, and I'm trying to remember the name of the medication that lowers the systolic blood pressure down below 120.
Yeah, well, all the medications may do that, but the one that we recommend the most is telmisartan. Telmisartan, that is a drug that we looked at all the different antihypertensive medications, and there's some good ones out there, by the way. It's not a dangerous class of drug for the most part, but the telmisartan seem to have the most benefits, fewest side effects, and you just want to get that number below 120 if you can.
It's a question from Joyce. Yeah, spell that maybe.
Yeah, TELMISARTAN, I think.
I'd like to point out that Bill's PowerPoint presentation that he's been giving tonight will become available. It'll be on our website shortly this week. If that's
yeah, that'd be good. And we'll put the telmisartan drug up there. As I said, certain information unfortunately had to be redacted, and that was redacted from this.
Joyce, was that your question?
Yes, telmisartan.
Question back here. Hey, Don.
Yeah, Bill, you were talking about the normal blood pressure being 120/80. What about when it gets too low? I got a two-part question. When it gets too low, what's the normal range? You're saying 120/80. Let's say you're 100/80, 105/75. What's the normal range below 120/80?
Okay, as it relates to blood pressure, any number over 115 increases your risk of heart attack. There are people who practice calorie restriction, and their blood pressure might be 95/60, and they're perfectly fine. So yeah, people can have low normal blood pressure and be perfectly fine, where others, if you push it too low, they're going to faint. So this is very individualistic. So if you have an at-home monitor, you can check your blood pressure and you say, hey, I'm normal today, 95. But if it drops below 85, well, maybe you just get a little concerned.
All right, part two to that question. When's the best time to take your blood pressure reading? During the day? Any particular time? Or how many times during the day do you take
I
it?
suggest to get a good reading as to where your blood pressure typically is 3 times a day. When you wake up, midday after you've drank your coffee, got a little stress in yourself, and then before you go to bed. Try 3 times a day, then 2 times a day. At some point, you'll have it consistent, and you can just check it every once in a while.
Question from Jose.
Yeah, Bill, you mentioned NAD infusions. There's a lot of supplements now on the market. How good are they, or, you know?
Yeah, we're talking about NAD plus infusions. If you're a younger person, you can buy precursors, basically nicotinamide-based precursors that will keep your NAD levels high. If you're a younger person, if you're an older person and your levels have gone from 80 in youth down to virtually 0 in old age, the precursors aren't going to be good enough. You need to boost them with the infusions and then keep them elevated with the niacinamide-based precursors. So that's where it's good. The precursors can help everybody, but not get you to where you need to be to fully repair your DNA like we hope it will.
Question from Larry.
Academically oriented, what are the mechanisms by which metformin and rapamycin work?
Okay, metformin and rapamycin both suppress excess mTOR-C1. That stands for the mechanistic target of rapamycin. As we grow older, we don't need mTOR to be elevated. I have some nice slides I can show, but from the time that we came into existence and our cells rapidly divided and we became people, we needed excess mTOR activity. All the way up through adolescence, high levels of mTOR, very good, very necessary. But now we've reached adulthood, we don't need a lot of mTOR activity. And yet we're over-consuming calories, we're over-consuming sugars, we're just eating so much, we're sedentary, we've got this high level of mTOR, and we're dying because of it. So rapamycin suppresses mTOR, and in doing so, it helps preserve our youthful functionality. That's the primary mechanism of rapamycin. Now, metformin indirectly suppresses mTOR. Rapamycin directly suppresses mTOR. And in doing so, it has a much more profound age reversal potential.
Question from back here, Bill.
You're going to hold it, okay. In 2008, I had a stroke, and Doogie Howser came to me in the ER and put his face up to mine and said, "You had a stroke, and you fried all the cells in the frontal or whatever, I don't remember." And as it turns out, Dr. Val and I went to the Wean Center in Mount Sinai last year. I had had a CAT scan of my brain, and the neurologist put the what you call it, the photograph up on the screen, and half of my brain was black. And we both said, "What is that?" "Well, you fried the right half of your brain with that stroke in 2008. So guys, I'm operating with a half a brain, so watch out.
And she's one of the brightest people on the planet. You wouldn't believe it. I have to call her to find out sections in history, all kinds of amazing.
Thank you, Kate. Okay.
Yes, you can. Some people are taking metformin and rapamycin. There's a protocol that I can tell you about. Let me just say about that situation. I just want to comment about that incredible situation that she relayed. The reason that thrombectomies are effective up to 24 hours after the onset of stroke symptoms is some people have great collateral circulation. So when a major cerebral artery is blocked, they still have blood feeding a good portion of their brain. So the neurons are able to stay alive just long enough so when you remove that clot via the mechanical retrieval thrombectomy, then normalcy returns. So you had great collateral circulation to somehow survive that. Very fortunate. Not everyone is.
Jose?
What's the
Quantity of metformin to take. What
Metformin dosage is typically based on gastrointestinal tolerability, and also the calorie content. If you're under eating, you don't need a lot of metformin. Maybe 500 milligrams a day if you're practicing severe calorie restriction. But if you're eating typically what people eat, yeah, that would probably be good. And one way to identify if you're taking too much metformin is if you start losing too much weight. There are people who practice calorie restriction and they lose too much weight, and then they just get off the metformin for a while so that they can put some weight back on. But some people are taking 2,000 milligrams a day of metformin because they're not calorie restricting, so they're using metformin essentially as a CR mimetic pill.
One more question from Mike, Bill.
Yes, Bill, what do you feel about resveratrol having an effect on the mTOR?
Well, resveratrol will help to suppress mTOR by virtue of boosting an enzyme called AMPK. It works a little bit like metformin. Resveratrol can boost AMPK, suppress mTOR, and it can then overly express, in a good way, the sirtuin proteins. Now, for the sirtuin proteins to function, and this is good news for all the resveratrol supplement users, it's good to enhance sirtuin expression, but the sirtuins need NAD to function. So the people who have been taking resveratrol for a long time, if their NAD levels are really low, they weren't getting the full benefits.
There's one more, Bill. One more question. You have?
Maybe a couple, but as metformin and
yeah, the big side
effects for metformin.
The big side effect that precludes people from using metformin, it precludes about 25% of people from using it the way they'd like to, is gastrointestinal issues, diarrhea. For some reason, people can take metformin, like me, on an empty stomach, nothing happens. Other people will eat a big meal and they take just a little bit of metformin and they have GI disturbances. So the biggest limiting factor to metformin, which is why we like the rapamycin approach, because that doesn't seem to cause these kind of problems, is GI side effects. Now, it can inhibit the absorption of vitamin B12, but if you take a B12 supplement at a separate time of the metformin, you'll probably be okay. Now, if you have kidney failure, liver failure, you can't take metformin because then you'll build up too much lactic acid in your body. It's called lactic acidosis. So that's what kept metformin from being approved sooner, is that a cousin of metformin called fenformin was killing people. So they assumed that metformin might also do the same. And they did a whole lot of research and they found out, wow, metformin is not killing people as long as you have healthy kidney and liver function. Rapamycin, you can read those side effects on the label, but it applies to people who are taking it every single day, organ transplant patients who are taking it every single day. Taking it once a week, very different than taking it every single day. So the side effects of taking it every day is you don't really feel very good, it can suppress your immune system. So we don't advocate rapamycin being taken every day. Once a week dosing is what appears to be working. The optimal dose, we don't really know. So we look at what are the upper limit doses, and if you can tolerate 1,800 to 2,000 milligrams a day, you're probably doing yourself a big favor. But again, it depends on how much you're eating. If you're under eating, you don't need as much metformin. If you're overeating, you ought to be taking more metformin.
One last item, and then downstairs you'll be able to have a chance to speak with Bill.
Hi, I just had a little tidbit about rapamycin, and that it was a study done in the early 2010s, I guess. And that was that rapamycin in mice eliminated the taus that cause Alzheimer's.
That's a spectacular finding, because as our brains grow older, they become occluded with beta amyloid plaque and tau proteins. And if rapamycin can do that, if nothing else, we're going to preserve our neurological function.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Faloon. Good job. As I mentioned, the PowerPoint that Bill used, will be available on our website. So if you'd like to share that with your friends or would like to go through it again, we'll have that on our website shortly, and you'll be able to have the spellings on some of those names. I'd like to also mention that we've got brochures, but when you leave tonight, be sure to pick up some brochures, and you can share those with your friends and family. We have the cryonics table outside. There's a free table and a cryonics table just outside this sanctuary and downstairs. If you're interested in cryonics, you can get some information there. Qigong will be here. Jeff, what's the time for Qigong? Okay, so get with Jeff, and if you're interested in Qigong here, there's free. There's Qigong that you can get with, and talk to Jeff about that. And I'd just like to invite you to visit with Bill and the rest downstairs. We have Chipotle tilapia, we've got teriyaki salmon, and tropical chicken, as well as several vegan options. So we invite you to join us for dinner and some time to talk about all these things that we've been talking about tonight. Thank you for coming, and next month, the 4th Thursday, we'll see you then.
It's called Forever Young.
May the good Lord be with you down every road you roam. And may sunshine and happiness surround you when you're far from home. And may you grow to be proud, dignified and true. And do unto others as you'd have done to you. Be courageous and be brave, and in my heart you'll always stay. Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young. May good fortune be with you, may your guiding light be strong. Build a stairway to heaven with a prince or a vagabond. And may you never love in vain, and in my heart you will remain. Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young. Forever young. And when you finally fly away, I'll be hoping that I served you well. For all the wisdom of a lifetime, no one can ever tell. But whatever road you choose, I'm right behind you, win or lose. Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young. Forever young. All right, thank you, everybody. Woohoo! That's our theme song here. Life is happening in the moment. Love and light to you. Know that all is as it should be. Love and light to you. not the destination. Love and light to you. It's about the joy and the celebration. Love and light to you. Love and light to you. Love and light is true. Love and light to you. Love and light to you.